Starting.
Hey everybody, welcome to Writers Chat, and I will tell you I'm really missing our other co-hosts, Jean Wise and Johnny Alexander. They do such a good job about opening these, and I almost forgot what to say, but what I am excited about is to have Melissa Stroh here with us, and also our guest this week, Tracy Crump, who is one of the sweetest, most wonderful people you will ever meet. And we've had her on here before, and so we are super excited because Tracy has really unlocked the secrets to writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a paying publication, which is fantastic. And she's been published 22 times in Chicken Soup, which is amazing. So today we are going to talk about, I think, some updates for writing for Chicken Soup, and then Tracy's also going to share some tips. And I do want to say that I know she's going to give so much information today, but she also is one of our Serious Writer Academy instructors teaching this exact topic. And I've heard so many testimonials from people who have gotten farther in the Chicken Soup process than they did prior to taking the class, and some have been accepted for publication in Chicken Soup, taking your advice and following your steps. And so that's just what this is all about, is teaching, you know, the tricks of the trade, and helping everybody get a foot in the door and get publication credits. I know that's your heart. So Tracy, welcome again. Welcome to everybody who's watching and with us in the chat. And let's just jump in. I will let you take the lead, and I got my notes ready. I am excited to learn. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I do love teaching others about writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's a great market. You know, they've been around, it's amazing, 26 years now. Who would ever have dreamed that they would have started with one little book and done as much as they've done? They have 300 different titles out, more than 300 titles. It's amazing. It is. I want to give everybody first a sneak preview of my next story in this book. It's called Think Positive, Live Happy. And it doesn't come out in bookstores until next Tuesday, a week from today, on the 24th. And the really interesting thing about this book is they call us contributors. When you've written a story that's been published, you're considered a contributor. The authors are the ones who have their names at the bottom of the book. And now it is Amy Newmark, who she is the owner of Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't know if everybody's aware that it changed hands back in 2008. Of course, Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen are the two motivational speakers who started this series. But they turned it over to her in 2008. And so her name is on every one of these books. But also she often gets someone else who is usually a well-recognized personality, especially in the field, if it's a particular field, like this one here, running for good. I had a story in that came out in June, which is funny because I don't run. I'm the girl who always got a stitch in her side just playing volleyball, so that was kind of funny. But their co-author there was Dean Karnazes. I may not be saying his name correctly, but he's an ultra marathoner, so he's a big name in that particular topic. But now on this one, Amy Newmark has Deborah Norville, who of course is a journalist and an anchor for Inside Edition. She's been around for ages. I don't know if I'm holding that right. But the really interesting thing about this is shortly after they decided to get together and put out this book, Think Positive, Live Happy, they were both diagnosed with cancer. So they said, we need this book. This book is important to us. So it's going to be positive stories. Of course, all Chicken Soup for the Soul stories are supposed to be inspirational. They want them to end. They may be sad, they may make you laugh, may make you cry, may make you get goosebumps, but they all are inspirational and end on a positive at some point. So anyway, that will come out next Tuesday. Now, I've lost my screen somehow, but I will keep on. You asked for updates on Chicken Soup for the Soul. Well, they are into everything right now. It's amazing, all the things that they are doing. They've got a line of pet foods coming out. They've got, or have yes, pet foods. I know. They usually do a dog or a cat book about every 18 months to 2 years. And they're so popular that they decided to come out with their own line of pet food. They do, and one thing they're doing recently, which I was amazed at, is they're doing some kind of plays, like school plays, and they're partnering with Hammers, with I couldn't think of their name, which I thought was amazing. They've come out with a line of soups. Imagine that, soup for chicken soup. There you are. You're back now, Bethany. They're just doing all kinds of things. They've got apps where you can live stream TV shows and other videos. They said that right now the books are actually the lowest, not lowest, but the smallest part of their business, because they have gone into all these other things, which is amazing. But they are not going to let it go anytime soon. They are constantly putting out books. They said that they've got 8 to 10 books coming out every year.
Wow.
And so for us as writers, the big news is that they have 8 books in the works right now, which is great because they don't always have that many listed on their website. And so I'll just go through. They've got some old, old favorites like the cat and dog book. They have one of each of those in the works. So if you've got any good cat stories, any good dog stories, submit those. They've got one about Christmas, and they usually do a Christmas book about every year or two. So Christmas stories, anywhere from Christmas through New Year's. If you've got any good stories like that, turn those in. But they've also got some really different things coming out. One is called Stories About Self-Care and Me Time. Ooh. And they say, a lot of times we're taking care of our families, we're taking care of work, we're taking care of maybe elderly parents or disabled relatives, and we don't take time to take care of ourselves. So they said they want stories about that, about how you realized maybe that you needed to take time for yourself, how you do that, what that looks like. And so those are going to be some really interesting stories. They've also got one coming out called You Go Girl. And it's about You Go Girl. It's about us as women, that, gaining self-confidence, becoming independent. Doesn't mean we have to be selfish or bossy, anything like that. But it's just kind of us putting our foot forward. And of course, as writers, we all do that. We probably all had to step out on faith and learn to get out there. And maybe we're kind of introverted. I know I am. But get out there and meet new people and learn how to do this business of writing. So that's gonna be some interesting things, I think. Another one is Laughter is the Best Medicine. That's I think I don't recall that they've had another book, just on funny stories, but that's what they want. They said, make us laugh in these stories. And we all have funny stories that have happened to our families or us, whatever. So that will be good. And then let's see, Listen to Your Dreams. Now they have done some of those before, and this is actually about dreams that you have while you're asleep. This is not like I dreamed I would, I dreamed of becoming something, not hopes or aspirations, actual dreams. And did they kind of give you insight into something that was going to happen? Did they warn you about something that was going to happen? Just things like that. So they've done a couple of those in the past about dreams. They've done some miracle books in the past. Another one is Golden Years or Second Wind. Now this is about life after 60. Not all of us are there yet. I am, but these are stories about life after 60. And they've done a couple of books similar to that. I know I had a story one time, and it was called Inspiration for the Young at Heart, was the book title. And that was more for retired people or people who, finding new things to do after you've maybe retired from your job, so things like that. So that's not a new topic, but we all have new stories that can go in that. So they've got a whole host of books that you will have at least one story for one of these books, and probably for several of them. Mm-hmm. So you can always go to chickensoup.com to find the story callouts. It's a little bit difficult sometimes, I think, to find it under their website. If you go on their homepage and look at the top, it says, I should have written this down because they changed it a while back. It used to say welcome. Anyway, click on those buttons over there. Find the one, go down where it says submit your story. Even if you're not ready to submit your story, you want to click there and go to that page, because the first page that comes up is actually where they have the upcoming books and their story titles. And it tells a little bit about each one and what they're looking for those. So that's that'll be where you want to go often, because we don't get story call outs for every one of the books that they are producing. You can, if you want story call outs, you can subscribe to our Write Life newsletter. We can talk about that later, and get those story call outs. But like I say, we don't get one for every single book. So you want to go to their website often and check for what they've got in the works, because they're constantly coming up with new books, new story ideas. And they'll have the deadlines there. Pay attention to those. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not unusual for them to extend a deadline. In fact, they just did that with one of these books, Laughter is the Best Medicine. They've extended it a couple of times, and it was supposed to be September 30th, but now it's October 31st. So if you're looking at stories for that particular title, you've got a little bit more time to come up with them. Also, you know, I don't know if you realize that Chicken Soup for the Soul is not a Christian series.
Right.
We think of soul, okay, that must be Christian. It's not. It is a general market series. So you can have, you can come up with all kinds of stories for these books, but they still need to be true stories. All Chicken Soup for the Soul stories are true stories, personal experience stories. And they say it has to happen to you or someone close to you. So in other words, you have to have intimate knowledge of the story. You can't just write about something, even if it was inspirational, that you read in the newspaper or heard on the internet. It has to be an actual story that happened to you, an actual personal experience story. So do you want to go now to my top 5 tips on writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul?
I do, and I'm on chickensoup.com right now looking at Laughter is the Best Medicine. And one thing I appreciate about them so much is they give you ideas, like suggested topics. There's like 20 bullets listed there on like memory joggers, and that's so great. Sometimes you feel like, oh, I don't have a story, and then you'll like, oh, that would work.
Right. It triggers memories.
Yeah.
And they do. And a lot of times those bullet points, a lot of those will turn into their chapter titles. So they'll do a chapter, and they'll do maybe 10, 15 stories under that particular chapter topic. But do know too that you are not limited to those ideas. If you come up with a story that fits with the book, with the theme of the book, go ahead and submit it, even if it's not, not particularly one of those suggestions that they made. They said they are just suggestions. So don't feel tied to that. If you've got something that kind of fits a little bit outside the box, that's okay. Go ahead and submit it and give it a try, as long as it fits with the theme. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in my 5 tips on writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, is to stick to the theme of the book. And it's so important, because so many people, we're writers, and we kind of get out on our little rabbit trails and chase that little rabbit down the trail. And it is so important to stick to the theme. And that's why whenever I'm writing a story for Chicken Soup for the Soul, I will a lot of times just stop in the middle of writing and go back and reread the call out, because that is what keeps me on track as far as the theme of the book. Each book does have its own theme, and even books that they have done repeated a theme over and over, like the dog book and the cat book and the Christmas stories. Each one of those will have a little bit of a different slant to it. So that's why I pay so much attention to the call out, because right there, they are telling you what they want. And so it's a lot easier to stay on theme when I read that call out over and over and over. And then I'll go through my story, and I'll make sure that I'm not chasing down a rabbit trail. If you're writing about, say, a trip that you took, don't turn it into a travel log. It's so tempting to say, oh gosh, I visited the Sistine Chapel, and then start giving history on the Sistine Chapel, or tell about details. If they're not important to your story, then don't do that. Because you have to remember, this is a story, not an article. It's not an article on your trip. It's not an article on the Sistine Chapel. And it is tempting to do that, because if you're interested in it, and you're passionate about it, you were there, But you have to remember it's the story that's important. That's what Chicken Soup for the Soul is all about, story. So that's one of my top 5 tips, is stick to the theme. Another, yeah.
And can we break that down again? What you said was so important. It's a story, not an article.
Right.
And
Not an article. Right. There is a big difference. Right. We don't give the detail. We give details in an article that we don't give in a story. And you have to remember, it's all about that personal connection with your reader. You're telling your story to your reader and how it affected you. And that's what a Chicken Soup for the Soul story is all about. So another tip is, and this sounds simplistic and kind of duh, is follow the guidelines. But you wouldn't believe how many people don't follow the guidelines. And it is so important. Once again, if you go on Chicken Soup for the Soul, and you click, like I said, and you go through to the page that shows all the story call-outs, there's another tab at the top of that page that has the guidelines. And so you click on there, and right there, they are telling you how to write your story. And it always amazes me, the people that have not read the guidelines and still they want to write the story. Right. Well, once again, Chicken Soup for the Soul is telling you right there how they want their story written. And so it behooves us to do that. If we want our story published, we have to follow their guidelines. And they're very, very specific in many things. So we not only have to follow their guidelines and read their call-outs, but I think it's important, too, to go back and read books that have been published by Chicken Soup for the Soul, because it's an example of what they are looking for. If they've published this story, then, hey, this is what they like. This is what they look for. And I recommend that you read books, especially that have been published since 2008, since they changed hands. Because, of course, every new editor is going to want to look for something a little different. They have their own preferences. And so that will give you a better idea of what they're looking for now. The more recent books have the stories that they're looking for now. So I think it's a good idea always, in any publication that you want to write for, is read what they've published in the past. Kind of study it, go through and break down, see what they're looking for. In our workshops, one of the breakout session that I teach is dissecting a chicken. And we take a Chicken Soup for the Soul story and we dissect it. We look at the beginnings, we look at endings, and then we look at the middle, the part that ties it all together. So I think it helps to do that, to go through and read stories and kind of do that for yourself. So we've talked about sticking to the theme. We've talked about following the guidelines. Another thing is narrowing the focus. One thing that I've seen a lot of people do is try to write too broad a story. For Chicken Soup for the Soul, it's 1,200 words or fewer. And I say fewer is better. Now, I've never heard an editor say this, but I really think that, we live in a soundbite generation. So if you can keep your story to maybe 600, 700, 800 words, you may have an even better chance of publishing with Chicken Soup. But you definitely have to narrow the focus. I tell people they don't want your whole memoir. They don't want your life story. So you have to narrow in, a lot of times, just to one event. But now a lot of times it's just one event. Now, but it doesn't have to be. Now, I wrote one story for the father and son soul one time, and it was about my husband and our younger son. Started out when he was a little boy, and they were playing a laser tag game. And he was right with his dad. We called it Dad's Shadow. And so that was his nickname on the laser tag game. They assigned us each a nickname, and that was Shadow. And so he's like his dad. He loves computers. All that. They always did stuff like that together. But when teenagers grow up or getting older, they kind of want to pull away. So he said, "No, I don't want to do computers. That's not what I want to go into." Well, turned around. That's what he ended up into. Yeah. He's in IT now, so he was Dad's Shadow. So it spanned a number of years from the time he was a little boy to the time he went to college. And but the theme was, now my theme within the theme was the relationship between the father and son. So even though it wasn't just one event, it was one aspect of their relationship. So that's another way you can write a Chicken Soup for the Soul story. But you do have to, like I say, you have to narrow the focus and keep it a very tightly written story. Once again, don't chase those rabbits. You have to stay very focused on your story, your theme within the theme.
Yes.
Also, you have to avoid testimony. And I think this is one of the big stumbling blocks for Christian writers is and that's a great thing, though, about Chicken Soup for the Soul. Even though they are not a Christian series, they're general market, they still allow you to talk about your faith a little bit. And this is, it's a hard line to determine what a little bit is. But then you can mention God in your story. You can mention your faith. But that can't be the focus of your story. Okay? The story still has to be about your personal experience. And I've seen so many Christian writers try to make it a Christian story, which you can't do for a general market publication. So we actually go into quite a bit of detail in our workshops about how to, trying to keep it from being and why you need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you still can talk about Christian themes, Christian attitudes, Christian perspectives, without specifically talking about Christianity or about God or about Jesus. We can do that and still make it a Christian story, and God can use those. I'm telling you, I know from experience that God can use those. And we don't have to. And another thing too, I always say is I wouldn't include scripture. I used to say that they never publish scripture in their stories. And then of course a friend of mine got a little snippet of scripture in one of her stories, but it was integral to her story. It was organically put in, and it was integral to her story. Normally I wouldn't say I've never tried to include scripture in any of my stories. I just wouldn't push the limits like that. Because if you do, then Chicken Soup's not going to publish your story. And, you may have lost the opportunity to reach some people with your message, an underlying message that you have in your story. So that's one thing. And they specifically say in their guidelines, avoid testimony and don't preach. Those are two things they specifically say. So we have to respect that when we're writing for their publication.
Yeah, that's such a good thing too, because writing in the general market can open up so many doors, like
yes,
publication wise, financially, like gives you a broader audience, and people can find out based on your social media or your website or however they're connecting with you. That's where you can put all your stuff, where you control it. So I mean, God totally can work through stories that aren't blasting out the Bible stuff. It doesn't take away.
Yes. Yeah. It can be just the first step.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
That thing exactly, that maybe your story allows you to reach out in another venue to that person, or they come and talk to you. And you never know the opportunities that will open up just from telling your story.
Yes, you're right. In fact, I had, from my first two stories were in Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul book several years ago. And a man from Saudi Arabia contacted me and said how much it affected him. Now, he has contacted a lot of people that who've written Chicken Soup for the Soul stories, so that's not real unusual for him. But still, we have that opportunity, like you say, to witness to him. So it can open doors. And another story that I had in the Alzheimer's book, Alzheimer's and Dementia's book, God used that to open some unusual doors. I got to speak to a group of people who were Alzheimer's chapter leaders in different areas. They had a meeting, and I was invited to come and talk to them. And I got to not only tell them about my mom's story, because she was misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's, but I also got to tell them how God gave me the answer one night about what was truly wrong with her. And so that was a great witnessing opportunity right there. And like y'all say, you never know what doors God is going to open with something like this, because you have to keep in mind, these books are read by millions of people. Yeah. Millions.
Yes.
They are the best-selling trade paperback series in publishing history, and they are still going strong. So you're right.
Yeah, and we've got chat going on in the comments about people who've been published in Chicken Soup, and then they received criticism for being in a general market book, and those people, I just want to be like, you are not my people. Like, they need to go, because, oh my gosh. And so many times the people who say those kinds of things, I mean, they're also watching shows that they, you know, probably aren't like the best stuff. I mean, there's always like this hypocrisy that comes in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just think Christians, we need to be the ones who are doing the good things in the world. Like, I don't know. That's a soapbox. I'm not going to get on it right now, but
I think the biggest thing is the servant's heart attitude. That's really what's lacking in those situations and those people. Because, you know, when you're going into this, you're going at it trying to reach people through any means, and, you know, you're serving them. Just like, you know, like you talk about, Bethany, reaching your audience. And so those people don't often understand the need to reach out to people where they're at and how important it is. Right.
We can preach to the choir all day long, but how is that reaching out to people who need to hear the good news of Jesus? That's not gonna work. It's not gonna help them. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And I was gonna say something else. It's left my mind, but I'll think of it later. Anyway. But yes. Oh, I know what I say in my workshops too is people who won't pick up a devotional book or a Max Lucado book may pick up a Chicken Soup for the Soul book, and they will read your story, and they may get the message in your story. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We're not reaching out if we're just preaching to the choir. And there's a you know, a good reason to write devotions and minister to each other. But there's a whole world out there that needs to hear the good news. So all right. So anyway, okay. So we've talked about following the guidelines, narrowing the focus, sticking to the theme, avoiding testimony, and finally, I say nail the takeaway. Every Chicken Soup for the Soul story has to make a point. I liked what they used to call it. They used to say it needs to end in a lesson learned, a positive change, or a payoff. You might want to write that down: a lesson learned, a positive change, or a payoff. They used to have that in their guidelines. I don't know once they updated their website, for somehow that got lost, but I think that's a good way to put it. And we, of course, as writers, we know that as takeaway. What does the reader take away with him or her that maybe change his life, like we've been talking about, give him a new perspective on something, change his opinion about something, or just make him feel better? There's nothing wrong with encouraging people with a story. So I have often seen kind of mediocre stories redeemed by a killer takeaway. So it is so important to write a strong takeaway. Now, I also warn people it's not an Aesop's fable, so you don't say, and the moral is, even though it's kind of tempting to do that. But you have to, but you want to get that in there sometime before the end. And a lot of Chicken Soup for the Soul stories do end in a kind of a paragraph that draws everything together. My friend Mary Lane says, we wrap it up, tie it up with a bow. It's your gift to the reader. So you want to make sure that you get your takeaway in there, that what you learned from your experience is a good way to do it. How that experience changed you, and then that's the takeaway that the reader can assume then in his or her life. So those are the top 5 tips that I have for writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul. So
I love it.
Okay. So what questions do we have? Do we have any questions?
Lots of good chat going on, I will say. So for those who are watching and can't read, people giving ideas for some of the call outs, and then making suggestions to each other about, you know, maybe you could write about this story or about this going on in your life. So that's always good. And we can continue this in the Facebook group too, the Writers Chat members Facebook group, if anybody wants to join us there. Rhonda says she's struggling with the takeaway for her laughter entry. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to see some comments about brainstorming. I don't see any questions, so let's go ahead and open it up, I guess, in the chat for anyone who's got questions. Oh, yes, Norma said, can you repeat the list of 5 takeaways
Sure.
one more time?
Sure. Okay, it's follow the guidelines, narrow the focus, stick to the theme, avoid testimony, and nail the takeaway. So usually if you stick to those tips, you'll write a good Chicken Soup for the Soul story. Now let me say this too, just because you're rejected doesn't mean you didn't write a good story. They receive an average of 3,000 submissions per book. Some books they get 5,000. So you've got a lot of competition. They only publish 101 stories in each book. So you've got a lot of competition, and a lot of times it will be just a matter of somebody else's story is so similar to yours. I know my friend Andy, who does the presents the workshops with me. She said that happened to her. She said she was so disappointed that one of her stories didn't make it into a dog book, and then my story actually made it in, and I gave her a copy, and she said I put it off to the side. I couldn't even look at it. But once she did, she said, I found a story that was so similar to mine, and she said it had a little bit better takeaway than mine. So she said, I understood right away why they didn't choose mine, because it was just too similar. So there are a lot of reasons that they may not choose your story. You've got a lot of competition, but always keep trying. You never know. And also, if you feel like you've got a good story, keep watching for another, and it gets rejected, keep watching for another book, another title to come up that your story might fit with, and submit it again. I know I submitted a dog story 5 different times before it was finally accepted, to 5 of their dog books. And like I say, each one has a little bit of a different slant. And so I would tweak it just a little bit for each submission. And I think, and it finally hit home. So keep trying. You never know. And keep writing new stories, because like I say, they're coming out with new titles all the time.
You said something that you got published in one of the Alzheimer's copies.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say that you were able to go speak to a group?
I did. That one was a little different. Sometimes they partner with organizations and actually will donate their proceeds from that particular title to the organization. And this time it was the National Alzheimer's Association. And I think what they did is they encouraged each state chapter to purchase a certain number of books. If somebody in their state had written stories in that book, to contact the writer, the contributor, and purchase a certain number of books, and then open doors for them to be able to speak or to do something where they could have book signings, whatever, where they could sell the books. So anyway, I got to speak to the leaders of some of the local Alzheimer's chapters. They had a meeting here and invited me to come and speak. And then later on, they also had an Alzheimer's fair. They may have called it, I don't know if they call it dementia fair. They didn't call it dementia or Alzheimer's, but something else. And anyway, they asked me to come and have a book signing table there for that.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so it was really neat. That was interesting. They've also partnered with some of their dog and cat books with like this Humane Society. Mm-hmm. And there was also, may have been a mom's book that they actually didn't do a call out for. They pulled stories from other books that had already been published, their Chicken Soup books, and they chose mine as one of them and published in a book for moms. I think they just wanted to very quickly, they didn't have time to go through the whole selection process, so they very quickly pulled it together, and it benefited the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. So that was kind of neat that they do that. And also, once you're published, of course, you get to purchase, they give you 10 books. That's one of the perks of getting published. You get $200 per story plus 10 books. And then you get the opportunity to buy more books at half price. Well, if you want to do a fundraiser, some kind of a fundraiser, for as long as it's 501c3 nonprofit organization that you're doing a fundraiser for, and you have to provide proof of that, you can get the books for just $5 a piece to do that fundraiser. So I think that's that's kind of, they are constantly into giving back to the community. And that's kind of a nice way to do that. And then you can raise funds for, like we're going to do one for our mission team. I think I've got the book. Yeah, our mission team at church had a story in The Power of Yes, came out last fall. And it was a story about our church doing an outreach to fair workers. workers who came through and did the Mid-South Fair each year. And so I got a carton of these, and we're going to do a fundraiser, sell these books, and raise money for a mission trip that our church is going to go on next year. So it's little things like that, yeah, that kind of make it neat to write for Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's a great market.
It is, and it got you into speaking now. I mean, so getting that story published also opened the door to speaking, and now pretty much anything that has to do with Alzheimer's, or even going beyond that into like maybe you can even broaden that. Now you've got on your CV or your resume that you speak to these groups. I mean, so this is really a gateway that just goes right along with the rest of your writing, the stuff that you're doing for your writing. This is amazing, and they pay, which is great, because so many times we write for free.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's nice to get back in some free copies.
That's right. That's right. It is.
How often? Oh, sorry.
So go ahead, Melissa. Go ahead.
How often does Chicken Soup for the Soul put out calls for submissions?
It varies. It varies a lot. I've seen them down to one story, one book on their potential book on their website. It's getting a little hot under the collar because we had a workshop coming up, and that's part of what we use in our workshops is to come up with stories for their actual call outs. And then, like I say, right now they've got about 8. So it varies. It just varies widely. You never know. And like I say, they do extend call outs a lot of times, but do know too that I have seen them move up a call out, move up a deadline date. So I always tell people, check that website, because you don't want to write a story for a book that's already, closed. The deadline's closed. But I've seen them move a deadline up. So you really need to check often on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Melissa, I think you said something about wanting to know about the submission process. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything in particular that you had a question on, or do you want me to just kind of go through it?
I know nothing of Chicken Soup for the Soul, so yeah, I'm going at it from the perspective of a complete beginner.
Okay. All right. Well, the only way that you can submit to Chicken Soup for the Soul now is through their online form. They used to allow you to submit by email or even snail mail, but no more. So you have to go on Chicken Soup for the Soul and go down, like I said, to submit your story. And it will come up first with the page where they have all their proposed books. But at the top, they have the 3 tabs, and one is the guidelines, and then the other one is, again, submit your story, and that's where you'll find the online form. And then you just go through and fill that out. It asks for your contact information. It asks if you want yes or no. Do you want the heads up on upcoming books? And you want to say yes, because once you do publish with Chicken Soup for the Soul, they will start sending you directly the story call outs, as long as you've clicked yes there. And then it asks for information about the story itself. And I tell people in my workshops that the first thing they ask for in that section is what the author's name is. And I think, well, I just gave you the author's name. Well, if by chance you want to submit under a pseudonym, they do allow that. So normally I put just my name, but if you want to submit under a pseudonym, that's where you would put your pseudonym. And then you put the information about the story, like the story title. It's whatever title you come up with. And I've never had them change one of my titles, which is, in the publishing industry, if you've published for magazines, you know that's kind of unusual, because a lot of times they will change your title. And the only reason I can think that they might do that is if they have another story with the same title. Okay. But anyway, and then they have a section, then they have a little box where you copy and paste your story in. And I always tell people, go back and reread after you've pasted in. I will tell you, and this upsets people a lot of times, we double space our submissions. When we send to an editor, we double space because we want to make it easy for the editor to read. But when you copy and paste it in that box, it automatically goes to single space. And I say, this is their form. This is the way they want it. Don't worry. I've had people try to go through and double space it again. It usually messes things up, so don't do that. But it will sometimes change if you have any kind of special characters in your story. Sometimes it will change those. So sometimes you can go through and just fix some of those. But I also say reread it, because invariably I'll find a misplaced comma or a misspelled word or something I can tweak just a little bit more, you know, because we're never finished with those babies, are we? We're never finished. There's always something more we can do. So I always say reread it. And then step 4 is what I tell people is the hardest step for us as writers, because that's where they have the submit button. And yet, like I say, we are never finished, and we never want to let go because we're afraid there's one more thing we need to do. But if you will hit that submit button, then your story will automatically go to Chicken Soup for the Soul, and you will get a screen that says, "Thank you, your story has been accepted," or I'm sorry, we have received your story. Your story has been received, and so they will have it in their system. And you always want to make sure, once again, that you are before the deadline. You make sure that a deadline has not passed. And usually, if you also have to indicate which book you're submitting to. So that they have a little drop-down box listing all the books that they have in the works at the time. So did I answer any questions about the submission process?
Those are some questions that were happening in the chat. Lee asked about how much profit does one have to give to a nonprofit. I'm guessing it's up to the person to determine how much of the profit they want to give away from the book, or it is, maybe I'm not understanding the question correctly. Okay. You don't receive a commission, you just get your payment.
Right. You mean as far as if you hold a fundraiser and you buy the books at $5 a piece? Okay, you have to buy a whole carton, so it's $100. I will usually keep $100 to pay for the box of books. Now, in this case, I'm donating the box to my church, but it's okay. I think it's okay to keep the $100 to the first few that you sell, to keep the money that you put into it, unless you just want to donate it. But then I sell them for $15, which is the cover price. So $14.95 is the cover price. So I sell, if it's a fundraiser, I figure people can pay the full amount. And you are welcome, the books that you receive, the 10 books that you receive free, you are welcome to go and sell those at book signings or what they call back of the room events. Now, they don't want you selling them online because that directly competes with their online sales, right? But you can sell those. And in that case, you can decide if you want to give a discount on them. I've done conference discounts and said, they're just $12 a piece, whatever. But usually for fundraisers, I charge the full cover price because you are trying to raise money for a nonprofit. So anyway, that's other than that, I may or may not keep the money for what I put into it, what I paid for the carton of books. But other than that, I donate everything to the nonprofit. I don't think they regulate it at all. They're not going to ask you. Chicken Soup for the Soul is not going to ask you what you charged or how you conducted it. But they do want to know that they are trusting you that it is going to a nonprofit. Yeah. So does that answer the question?
I think so. So let us know if you have any other questions on that. And then, so this was answered in the chat. Let's go ahead and get it on the recording. Somebody was asking about the editing process, and does that happen before acceptance or after acceptance, or do they offer suggestions? And Rhonda said they expect the story to be edited well by the time they get it, and if they accept it, they'll make any changes prior to publication, but they don't get feedback.
They don't get feedback. Now, you have to remember they are receiving thousands of submissions, and so what they're looking for is a well-told story that fits the theme and all the things that we've already talked about, the tips that we talked about. But it's got to be, you're going to need to submit your best work. And really, with any publication, that's what we should be doing, is submitting our best work. As Christians, we're held to a standard, and we are in competition with other people. That doesn't sound nice as a Christian, but we are. So you need to submit your best work. So no, as far as editing, they actually do very little editing, or they have on my stories. A lot of times it's just for space, or they may change a word here or there, and then they send you, if your story is accepted, they will send you a copy before they actually go to publication and let you approve that. So if for some reason you did find a misplaced comma or a misspelled word, they will usually catch it. But if they didn't, then you have an opportunity to tell them, this really needs to be changed. But yeah, the editing that's a lot of times nowadays. I hate to say it, editors do not have time for editing.
It's
you know, as far as publishers, editors, they don't have time for it. So we need, it's up to us to send our best work. And that's why critique groups are so great. You know, editing, if you have somebody that can edit your work, that's so important to do before you ever send the story.
Yes. I agree. Grammarly is my best friend, I will just say. I still rely on an editor, like a person that will tell you. I learned so much of my own mistakes that I keep making because Grammarly will catch it.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, we've got one more question that I want to make sure we get on the recording from Robin, and then as soon as we answer that, for the last 10 minutes or so, we'll have people come in so they can talk to you one-on-one, and then we'll go off the recording for the after party. So that'll be the format for the next just little bit. Okay, so I'll just scroll back up. Robin had a question about, somebody was asking about reprints. In the chat, someone said they accept first rights, but they don't accept reprints unless it was published on a very low platform, is what the thing was. So Tracy, can you address that?
Yes, they actually went into more detail in one of their newsletters about that. They said if it was, they don't accept previously published material unless it was published in a small local venue. And then they said by that they mean if it were in a small hometown newspaper, a small local magazine, or your blog would be okay, your church's newsletter, any of those venues would be okay. But if it were published in a major metropolitan newspaper, a national magazine, or another anthology, then they said don't submit it. Now they will also want to know where, even if it's a small venue, they want to know where it's been published before. And so that's something when you submit, we didn't go into this, it's kind of a lot of detail, but when you submit your story, their online form has a comments line. Most of the time I don't put anything in there, but if my story had been published in a small venue, I would tell them. That's where you would tell them that it had been published before. And if you have, say, the numbers on the circulation for that, you could include that. You know, was in my church's newsletter, it goes out to 200 people. Well, that wouldn't bother them, you know, they're going out to millions. So, but they just want to know that it hasn't been generally seen by the general population. And of course, these books go worldwide. It's not just in the United States. They go all over the world.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we do have a couple more questions in here. So let's let everybody come back on. I'll let you guys ask Tracy. Carissa, we'll have you go first. Joe, second, and then anyone else who wants to pop in for the last couple minutes, since that's the order is in the chat. If you can't get back on, just put something in the chat, and Melissa or I will release you from what Jean calls Writer's Chat jail. So we're pretty quick sometimes on the stop video button, so we can make sure we get you back on. So is Carissa on here? There she is. Okay, Carissa, go ahead. I can't.
Did we lose her?
I can't hear you.
Yeah, I realized I've got the actual microphone on mute. Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Hey.
How long is it before you hear back from them on a submission?
Okay, that varies too. Usually you wait until it'll be after they've closed, you know, after the final deadline. And like I say, a lot of times they will extend it. So it'll be the final deadline. And then they say it may be several months. Now their website still says it takes up to 4 years to produce a book. That's greatly reduced. We've seen that over the past few years. That's greatly reduced. But they do say that if you have not heard within 2 months of the book's release, then you can pretty well figure that they did not choose your story. And the way you find that out is you go on their website and you find the link for coming soon. And under that, they will tell you the books that are coming out and give the release dates on those. If they don't have that book listed, that particular title, then they may not have, you know, come up with a release date yet. But if you see the release date and it's within 2 months of the book's release, then you can probably figure they did not choose your story. And it kind of helps to know the process that they go through. You know, I understand sitting on pins and needles and thinking, I want to hear, did they take my story? What they do is they take those thousands of submissions once the deadline is passed, once the submissions have closed, take those thousands of submissions and cull them down to the top 150 to 200. And then, of course, they're only going to publish 101. If your story is one of those top 150 to 200, at that point, they will send you a contract. That does not mean your story is guaranteed to be in the book. They're just saying that at this point, they don't want you to sell your story to somebody else, okay, until they finish their selection process. And at that point, they're really very close. So if you are in one of those top, if you get a contract and you're in that top 150 to 200, at that point, you will, once they make their selections, you will get an email, yes or no, if they've selected your story. Normally, if you just submit and you don't hear anything, you will not get a rejection notice. They simply get too many submissions to send out rejection notices to thousands of people. So so you won't hear anything normally unless you get a contract, and then you will find out within a short, maybe a few weeks, yes or no, if they've chosen your story.
Okay, Joe?
Yes, thanks so much for the information. I really got learned a lot about Chicken Soup.
Good.
I run a book club, and I have on the website a section for myself where I put blogs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, as you're talking about submitting something as a part of the blog that I've written, because the blog is really Christian-based, and it's about being in the prime of your life. And I use two different people as examples. One would be Abraham Lincoln, and how he lost so many elections and so many things happened to him before he became president of the United States. And then I talked about Paul. And so my question is, it's up as a blog on the website. Can I adjust that and make changes and use it as a submission?
You can, as far as their guidelines about previously published material, yes, you can. They're okay with it being a blog. Now, if you have 2 million followers, they may change their mind, but for most of us, that's not the case. But let me tell you this, as far as using historical figures, that's not what they're looking for.
Okay.
That's not the kind of story they're looking for. Even though it's inspirational, they want a personal experience story. That's what Chicken Soup for the Soul is all about. Something that happened to you or someone close to you. So you have to basically be part of the story.
Okay, so let me ask you one more question then.
Sure.
4 years ago, my brother, who is now 67, came to live with us. He has autism and a learning disability. And that is something that has totally transformed our lives, my husband and myself.
I can imagine.
So I've thought about writing something about that. Is that something that you think would be more on a personal level?
I do. Yes, absolutely. Now you're going to have to watch for a title to come up that will fit with, because it's got to fit with the theme of a book.
Okay.
Now if something funny happened, you could submit something to Laughter is the Best Medicine, but they've had actually stories about people with disabilities like that. So, I don't know if they'll do another one or not. You just have to watch. But yeah, and you can slant a story. It doesn't have to be specifically a book about people with autism. Okay? You can watch for a title that you can slant a story to that pop. And really, the stories about self-care and me time, could you come up with something like that? Because I'm sure it's pretty intense and something, or it could be something, I don't know what ages we're talking about, like the golden years. This is not something you probably figured on doing at this point in your life.
Exactly. Yep.
You could maybe write something for that. So yeah, you could actually, I wrote 3 different stories about my mom and her illness, published in 3 different Chicken Soup for the Soul books, but they were entirely different stories focused on different aspects of her care or her illness and things like that. And so you can write different stories about the same basic situation.
Okay.
And go ahead and submit. If you've got a funny story and a story about self-care, submit them both. Write them both up. Submit them both.
Okay.
That's okay.
All right. Thank you.
And I haven't said this, but you can even submit the same story to 2 different Chicken Soup for the Soul books in the works at the same time if it would fit with both. For example, one time they had a book called Mothers and Daughters, and another time, and at the same time, they had a book called, something else about mothers. I can't remember the exact title. And if your story would fit with both, you could submit to both titles at the same time. in that comments line, they would want to know that you're submitting because they will only publish in one or the other. So they would want to know. But you could do that too if you had the same story that would fit with more than one title, say. Or you can, and so I would try maybe one of these titles and then just kind of watch and wait and see if they come up with another title that your story might fit with.
Okay.
So yes, I think that would be perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Carissa had another question.
Can you submit more than one story for each book?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. Yes, you can submit as many stories as you want. And I have had 2 published at a time in book. Well, actually one, I had 3 published in. That was kind of, at one point they did 3, had some devotional books, which was a really different venue, different format for them. But normally, and I've said this before, normally I don't see more than 2 stories by one author in any one book. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a rule that they follow, but that's pretty much what, from my observation, that I've seen. But yes, you can submit as many as you want, as long as the deadline isn't passed. Go for it.
All right, we are at the top of the hour almost. So in the chat, I went ahead and put the link to Tracy's class. We get Mary to come back online, and we are going to close out the recording portion, and then we'll stay on for just maybe 10-12 minutes for our after party, so you can say the things you didn't want on the recording or ask any other questions. So I just want to close out, and Tracy, again, this was amazing information, and for those watching this and can't see the chat, her class can be found at her instructor page at seriouswriteracademy.com/Tracy-Crump. And then your website as well, because you also have a writing newsletter for writers. Do you want to share about that? Because I want to make sure people have a chance to get signed up for that. Sure.
Yeah, you can go to writelifeworkshops.com, and that's WRITE, workshops with an S. writelifeworkshops.com, and or you can go to tracycrump.com and sign up. It's called The Right Life, and we send just a monthly little newsletter. We have different authors contribute the main article, but we also send story call-outs for Chicken Soup for the Soul and other anthologies that we find out about occasionally. There's one that's been for the Guideposts, a Guidepost book. So it's a good way to get those story call-outs. And they come to your inbox and they'll prod you then to try to write for those, to think about what you could submit to that particular title. So yeah, we'd love to, and we usually have just a little tip on writing for Chicken Soup and Soul, or something about Chicken Soup and Soul in each newsletter too.
Yay! All right, so we'll go ahead and go off the recording, and we will have this. It'll be live today. And then Melissa, we didn't really have any too personal things, so we are going to go ahead and share this chat as well in the Facebook group, so you can get links or any of the tips and stuff that we had going on in here, just so you guys know. And thank you all for being here. We love you and everyone who's on screen and then still off video. Thanks so much. Oh, next week so next week we're doing something a little bit different because my mom and Jean aren't going to be here, so we moved things around a little bit. Next week, I'll be doing live marketing strategy sessions, and I think I could do 3 or 4. So we'll put something in the Facebook group, but if you want to be one of the 3 or 4 people to do we'll do a live strategy session with, I think that'll be fun, and well, I think it'll be fun. So hopefully you guys think it's fun. Anyway, that's next week. So thanks all for being here, and we'll see you later.
See you.